In the winter of 2025, something happened in America that nobody had a category for. Grocery stores put limits on how many cartons of eggs one customer could buy. Diners and national restaurant chains added a surcharge to every egg they served. Store shelves sat empty. And at the southern border, federal agents found themselves seizing smuggled eggs more often than they were seizing fentanyl. Then, on the first day of February, thieves backed up to a distribution trailer in Pennsylvania and stole 100,000 eggs, $40,000 worth, in a single night. A state trooper who had spent her whole career in law enforcement told reporters she had never heard of anything like it. Eggs. The cheapest, most ordinary, most boring thing in the entire store had become something worth stealing by the truckload. And if you think that is strange, it is not even close to the strangest thing that human beings have done over an egg. But the story of the egg does not start in a grocery store. It started 300 million years before there was such a thing as a chicken, with an invention that let life crawl out of the water and take over the world. Here is something most people never think about. For hundreds of millions of years, every animal on Earth with a backbone was chained to water because their eggs were soft and had to be laid in it. Then, somewhere over 300 million years ago, evolution produced one of the most important inventions in the history of life, an egg with its own private pond inside it. A sealed shell, its own water supply, its own food supply, its own waste disposal. A complete life support capsule that could be laid on dry land, in the dirt, in the desert, anywhere. That single invention is why reptiles, birds, dinosaurs, and eventually, in a roundabout way, we were able to leave the water behind and conquer the planet. Long before it was breakfast, the egg was the technology that made land life possible. The chicken showed up a great deal later. Its ancestor is a shy, brilliantly colored jungle bird from Southeast Asia called the red jungle fowl, a bird that spends most of its life hiding in undergrowth and is genuinely difficult to catch. Humans have it remarkably recently. Recent research points to 3,500 years ago in Southeast Asia, tied to the spread of rice farming, with the birds drawn out of the forest by the grain. Older estimates push it back much further. And here is the part that surprises people. There is good evidence that people do not domesticate this bird for its eggs, or even mainly for its meat. They kept it for cockfighting, for ritual, and for status. In many early societies, the chicken was a fighter, a sacred animal, an exotic possession, a living symbol. The breakfast came later. It had to come later because a wild jungle fowl hen is a terrible egg factory. She lays a small clutch, somewhere in the range of 10 to 15 eggs, once or twice a year, in season, and then she stops and raises chicks. That is it. So how do we get from that to the carton in your fridge? Thousands of years of relentless human selection. Generation after generation, farmers kept the hens that laid more, laid longer, laid out of season, and stopped going broody. The result is one of the most extreme transformations humans have ever performed on a living creature. A modern laying hen produces somewhere around 300 eggs a year, from a dozen to 300. We did not just tame a bird. We rebuilt it. And that rebuilt bird went on to conquer the earth more completely than any human empire ever has. There are somewhere in the range of 25 to 30 billion chickens alive on the planet at any given moment, more than every other bird species combined, wild or domestic. There are 3 chickens for every human being. If some future geologist digs into the layer of rock we are laying down right now, one of the clearest signatures of our entire civilization will be chicken bones. A shy jungle bird that hid in the undergrowth is now, by sheer numbers, the most successful bird in the history of the world. All because we wanted what was inside its eggs. The ancient Egyptians did something with eggs that Europe could not copy for 2,000 years. They built hatcheries, enormous mud brick complexes of domed chambers, heated by carefully tended fires of straw and dung, where tens of thousands of eggs could be incubated at once without a single hen. No thermometers, no instruments. The operators judged the temperature by holding an egg against their eyelid, the most heat-sensitive skin on the human body, and adjusted the fires by feel. The knowledge was held tightly by a small number of families and passed down like an inheritance. When European travelers described these hatcheries, people back home flatly did not believe them. In the 1700s, one of France's greatest scientists tried to reproduce the Egyptian system and struggled. A technology from the age of the pharaohs stayed ahead of European science for well over 2,000 years, and versions of those same mud brick hatcheries were still working in the Egyptian countryside in modern times. In Rome, the egg was where every proper meal began. Roman banquets opened with eggs and finished with fruit, so reliably that the Romans had a stock phrase for start to finish, from the egg to the apples. Eggs were also tangled up in Roman magic. Writers of the period recorded a superstition that after eating a boiled egg, a person should crush the empty shell, because an intact shell could be used against them in a curse. 2,000 years later, plenty of people still smash their eggshells at the breakfast table and have no idea they are performing a Roman anti-witchcraft ritual. But the strangest thing Rome did with chickens was hand them command of the navy. Roman commanders carried sacred chickens on campaign, and before a battle they consulted them. The birds were offered grain, and if they ate eagerly, the gods approved. If the chickens refused to eat, the gods were against you, and you did not fight. In 249 BC, a Roman admiral named Publius Claudius Pulcher was preparing to attack the Carthaginian fleet at Drepana when his sacred chickens refused their grain. Pulcher, out of patience, had the birds thrown over the side of the ship, snapping that if they would not eat, they could drink. He attacked anyway, and was crushed. Rome lost most of a fleet of well over 100 ships in one of the worst naval defeats in its history. Pulcher was recalled in disgrace, put on trial, and fined. Rome did not blame his tactics. Rome blamed him for drowning the chickens. An entire fleet sunk over an argument about breakfast. Christianity changed the egg in a way nobody planned. For centuries, the rules of Lent in much of Europe banned not just meat but eggs and dairy for 40 days before Easter, which created an obvious and very awkward problem. Nobody told the hens. The chickens kept laying every day for 6 straight weeks, while nobody was allowed to eat one. So, 2 traditions were born out of pure practical desperation, and both are still with you today. The first is the great clear-out on the day before Lent began. Households cooked off the eggs, butter, and fat they were about to be banned from eating, and the simplest way to burn through all of it at once was a batch of pancakes. That is the entire origin of Pancake Day, Shrove Tuesday, a holiday that exists because of a refrigeration problem in the Middle Ages. And the second tradition came at the other end. After 40 days of hoarding, Easter arrived with cellars and cool rooms full of eggs, and the feast became an explosion of them. Eggs were boiled, decorated, blessed in church, given as gifts, and handed out to children and servants. The symbolism fit so perfectly that it felt inevitable. An egg looks like a dead stone, and then it cracks open and life walks out. Long before Christianity, cultures across the ancient world had already used the egg as a symbol of rebirth and the origin of the universe. Persians exchanged eggs at the spring New Year, a custom still going today. Christianity simply pointed at the same object and saw the resurrection in it, and eggs were dyed red to represent blood and sacrifice. In Eastern Europe, egg decorating grew into a genuine folk art. Pancake, made with beeswax and layers of dye and patterns passed down through families for generations, each symbol carrying meaning. All of it because medieval hens refused to observe Lent. Somewhere along the way, the egg stopped being just food and became the raw material of an art form. French cuisine, more than any other, was built on the strange physics of the egg, the fact that one ingredient can thicken, bind, aerate, emulsify, and set, depending entirely on how you treat it. Mayonnaise, hollandaise, custard, meringue, soufflé, none of them exist without the egg, and all of them are controlled science experiments. There is a story told in professional kitchens that the tall pleated white-hatted chef carries 100 folds, one for each way a master chef should be able to cook an egg. Whether that origin is real or a piece of kitchen folklore, chefs repeat it because it captures something true. In classical training, how you manage an egg is the test. It is the simplest thing in the kitchen and the hardest to do perfectly. And then the egg reached the outer limit of luxury. In 1885, Tsar Alexander III of Russia commissioned the jeweler Peter Karl Fabergé to make an Easter gift for his wife, an egg in enamel and gold, which opened to reveal a golden yolk, which opened to reveal a golden hen, which opened to reveal a tiny crown. The empress was so delighted that it became an annual tradition and then an obsession. Every year for 3 decades, Fabergé's workshop produced an imperial egg for the Russian royal family, each one taking a year or more, each one built in total secrecy, with only one rule: it had to contain a surprise. There were eggs with miniature portraits, eggs with a working model of a royal palace, an egg containing a golden train that ran. 50 of them were made for the imperial family. Then, in 1917, the revolution came. The Romanovs were swept away, and the Bolsheviks seized the eggs and began selling them off to raise foreign currency. Several vanished into private hands and were never seen again. Hold that thought, because one of those lost eggs is going to turn up at the end of this video, in a place nobody could have predicted. If you find this video interesting, hit subscribe. We uncover the hidden history of everyday foods every single week, and you will not want to miss what comes next. Because the 20th century is about to put the egg on trial for murder, and then take 40 years to admit it got the verdict wrong. And this is where the story takes its darkest turn. In the middle of the 20th century, egg production was industrialized with a completeness that would have horrified every farmer who came before. The hen, a bird that in the wild scratches, dust bathes, roosts in trees, and lays a dozen eggs a year, was placed in a wire cage roughly the size of a sheet of paper, stacked in tiers inside windowless sheds, with lighting engineered to keep her laying. It made eggs unbelievably cheap. It also turned a living animal into a component in a machine, and it took decades of public pressure, undercover footage, and eventually legislation in Europe and parts of the United States before that model started to be dismantled. The cheapest protein in human history was purchased at a price that simply was not printed on the carton. Then came the trial. In the second half of the 20th century, medical science identified cholesterol in the blood as a driver of heart disease, the leading killer in the Western world. And the egg yolk happens to be one of the most cholesterol-dense foods there is. The logic seemed airtight. Cholesterol in your food must become cholesterol in your blood. Health authorities began telling the public to limit eggs. For years, official American advice suggested no more than a few a week. The message worked. Egg consumption in America fell over the following decades. The egg went from breakfast icon to suspected killer, and an entire generation grew up throwing away the yolks. Britain got a sharper shock. In December 1988, a junior health minister said publicly that most of the country's egg production was infected with salmonella. The reaction was instant and brutal. Egg sales collapsed by 60% overnight. The farming industry went into freefall. Millions of hens were slaughtered, and the minister resigned within about 2 weeks. The panic was real. The underlying salmonella problem was real, and Britain eventually fixed it with a national vaccination program for laying flocks. But the industry never forgot how quickly a single sentence could destroy it. And the cholesterol case? It fell apart. As the research matured, scientists found that for most people, cholesterol eaten in food has a far smaller effect on blood cholesterol than had been assumed. The liver simply adjusts its own production. In 2015, the expert committee advising the U.S. dietary guidelines dropped cholesterol from its list of nutrients of concern for overconsumption, effectively ending the official war on the egg yolk. Think about the scale of that reversal. One of the oldest, cheapest, most complete sources of nutrition available to human beings was publicly convicted, avoided by millions of people for the better part of half a century, and then quietly acquitted. Nobody sent out a letter of apology. The egg just went back on the menu. The Second World War proved something about the egg that no peacetime market ever could. The world would go to extraordinary lengths not to lose it. With shipping under attack and fresh eggs impossible to move safely across an ocean, America dried them into powder and shipped them to Britain by the ton. British families spent years cooking with reconstituted egg powder, and a generation of children grew up on it. Nobody liked it. Everybody ate it. When food is important enough that a country at war spends precious cargo space on a powdered version of it, that food is not a luxury. It is infrastructure. Today the numbers are staggering. The world produces somewhere in the region of 1.5 trillion eggs every year. China alone accounts for a third of them. And the reason is simple, and it is the same reason our ancestors bothered in the first place. For most of the world's population, the egg remains the cheapest complete protein available. It contains every amino acid a human body needs, in the form the body absorbs completely, packaged in a sterile container with a built-in shelf life, at a price that even the poorest households can occasionally reach. Nutritionists have historically treated the egg as the reference standard. The yardsticks of other proteins are measured against. And unlike every other food we have covered on this channel, the egg never had to conquer anybody. It did not need an empire, a trade route, or a marketing campaign. Wherever humans went, chickens went with them, and every culture invented its own answer to the same question. Japan turned it into layered omelet and silken custard. India folded it into street-side bhaji. Mexico built breakfast around it. France made an art form of it. Britain pickled it. China preserved it in ash and clay until it turned black and translucent and called it a delicacy. One ingredient, and every civilization on Earth arrived at a different masterpiece. But this next part tends to catch people off guard. Right now, in undisclosed locations across the United States, there are flocks of chickens whose numbers and whereabouts are treated as a matter of national security. They are guarded, monitored, and kept under strict biosecurity. And their job is not to feed anyone. Their job is to make vaccines. For over 80 years, the world's flu vaccine supply has been grown inside fertilized chicken eggs. A virus strain is injected into the egg. It multiplies inside exactly as it would in a human body, and the fluid is harvested and processed into a shot. One egg produces one dose. In a single American flu season, which can mean well over 100 million eggs, and one manufacturer alone can process 600,000 eggs a day. Experts have calculated that a serious pandemic response would require something like 900,000 eggs a day for months on end. It is 1940s technology holding up 21st century medicine, and it means that global pandemic preparedness quietly depends on the reproductive schedule of the chicken. And then there is the egg that almost went into a furnace. A few years ago, a scrap metal dealer in the American Midwest bought a small, ornate gold egg at a flea market for around $14,000, planning to melt it down and turn a quick few hundred in profit. The math did not work. Nobody would give him what he needed, and he was left stuck with an expensive gold ornament he could not sell. One night, out of frustration, he typed the word egg and the name engraved on the little watch inside it into a search engine. What came back was a newspaper article about a frantic international hunt for a lost treasure. He flew to London with photographs. It was the third Imperial Easter egg, made by Fabergé for Tsar Alexander III in 1887, missing since the chaos of revolutionary Russia and valued at around $33 million. A masterpiece that survived the fall of an empire, decades of disappearance, and an Atlantic crossing came within an inch of being melted into a lump of gold on a workbench in the American Midwest, and was saved because nobody wanted to buy it. Step back and look at what this object has done. It began as the invention that let life leave the water, a sealed capsule of everything a growing creature needs, 300 million years before anyone thought to eat one. We pulled a shy bird out of a Southeast Asian jungle, mostly for fighting and ritual, and then spent thousands of years rebuilding it until it laid 300 eggs a year instead of a dozen and turned it into the most numerous birds on the planet. Egyptians hatched eggs by the tens of thousands in mud brick ovens using nothing but their own eyelids as thermometers. A Roman admiral drowned his sacred chickens and lost a fleet. Medieval Lent accidentally invented Pancake Day and Easter eggs. French chefs turned one ingredient into an entire branch of cuisine, and a Russian jeweler turned it into 50 of the most valuable objects ever made. Then the 20th century caged the hen, put the yolk on trial for murder, took half a century to admit its mistake, and quietly handed the egg the job of keeping the world's vaccine supply alive. And tomorrow morning, someone will take one out of the fridge, crack it on the side of a pan, and think about absolutely none of this. 300 million years of engineering, 10,000 years of human obsession, and it costs less than anything else you will eat all day. Not bad for something we still call ordinary. If this story surprised you, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling us which part shocked you the most. The Roman fleet lost over sacred chickens, the 40 years the world was told to fear the yolk, or the $33 million egg that was nearly melted for scrap. And like this video so more people can find it. We have a lot more hidden food history coming.